The windshield wipers struggled against the relentless October rain as Harold Whitman drove his old Buick down Route 9. At 62, he'd seen many storms in his life. But this one seemed especially determined to make the evening drive as miserable as possible. The radio buzzed with weather warnings, but Harold turned it down, preferring the soothing rhythm of the rain on the roof. That's when he saw her slight figure standing beneath a flickering streetlight at a bus stop. Her thumb extended toward the sparse traffic. Her clothes were soaked through, and she held a small canvas bag tightly to her chest like a shield against the world. Harold had driven this road for nearly 30 years. First as a young father rushing home to dinner with his wife Margaret and their 2 boys. Now as a widower with nowhere urgent to be, he'd passed countless hitchhikers over the years, always offering a polite wave and a quiet prayer for their safety. But something about this young woman's posture, shoulders hunched. Exhaustion etched into every line of her body made him ease off the gas. He could already hear Margaret's voice in his mind. She had a gift for sensing when someone needed help, and would never have driven past someone in this kind of weather. Harold pulled over and rolled down the window just enough to be heard through the rain. "Miss, do you need a ride somewhere?" The girl looked up. She was younger than he expected, no older than 19 or 20. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her eyes carried a weariness far beyond her years. "I don't want to be any trouble," she said, barely audible. "No trouble at all," Harold replied gently. "I'm heading toward town. Hop in before you catch pneumonia." She hesitated, then made her way around the car and climbed in. As she settled into the passenger seat, shivering, Harold reached behind him and grabbed the old wool blanket he always kept for emergencies. "Here, wrap yourself in this. There's coffee in the thermos still warm from this morning." "Thank you," she whispered, her hands trembling as she accepted both the blanket and the drink. "I'm Harold," he said. "Harold Whitman. And don't worry. Won't ask you any questions you don't want to answer." They drove in silence for the first few miles, the soft hum of jazz playing on the radio, Margaret's favorite. The girl, now wrapped in the blanket, sipped coffee and stared out at the rain-soaked landscape. Harold stole occasional glances at her reflection in the window. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same one he'd seen in his own after Margaret passed. The look of someone who had lost their anchor in the world. "My grandmother used to say, 'Rain washes away yesterday's troubles,'" Harold said quietly. "I never believed her until I got older." The girl turned toward him, her expression softening for the first time. "She sounds wise." "Oh, she was. Raised 6 kids on her own during the Depression after my grandfather got sick. She always made things feel manageable, like no matter how bad it got, there was always a tomorrow." "I used to have someone like that," the girl said. "My great-aunt Eleanor. She taught me piano, told me stories about her travels when she was young. Always said kindness was the most valuable currency a person could spend." Harold smiled. "Sounds like your aunt and my grandmother would have gotten along just fine." As the miles passed, the girl began to share her story. Her name was Sarah. She'd grown up in privilege Harold could barely imagine private schools. Summer homes? A future mapped out for her. But she'd recently discovered that the wealth came with expectations she couldn't bear. "They want me to marry someone," she said. "It's more of a business deal. Really someone who can help expand the family empire. They say it's tradition. That it's what's expected." Harold listened quietly. He knew that money could be just as much a prison as poverty. "And what do you want?" he asked. "I want to teach music to children. I want a garden, maybe a dog. I want to live somewhere quiet. Want to choose my own path even, if it means walking away from everything else." She paused, then added, "I know it sounds foolish." "Doesn't sound foolish at all," Harold said. "Sounds like someone who knows her own heart." They passed through a few small towns before Sarah asked him to stop at a retro-looking diner. Over plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Harold shared stories of his kids now grown and scattered and the joy he found in retirement. He spoke of his volunteer work at the local elementary school, reading to children who reminded him of his younger self. "You know," he said as they finished dessert, "the school is always looking for music teachers. Doesn't pay much, but there's a small apartment above the music store. The owner's been trying to rent it for months. Sarah's eyes lit up. Really? Really? And I happen to know the principal pretty well. We served on the church board together for years. 2 hours later, Harold pulled up in front of his modest Victorian home. The rain had finally stopped, and the stars were starting to appear through the clouds. "This is my place," he said. "You're welcome to the guest room for as long as you need. Tomorrow, I can introduce you to a few folks who might be able to help." Sarah stared at the warm light glowing from the porch, the flower boxes carefully maintained despite the season. "I can't accept your hospitality without telling you the truth," she said softly. "My last name is Patone. It's in Patone Industries." Harold was quiet for a moment, taking it in. Of course, he'd heard of the Patone family. Their name was on hospitals, stadiums, and scholarship foundations across the state. But looking at her now, he didn't see an heiress. He just saw Sarah tired, lost, and searching for a place to belong. "Well then," he said with a small smile, "I guess that makes this evening even more special. It's not every day an old widower gets to help someone find their way home." 3 months later, Harold sat in the front row of the elementary school auditorium, watching Sarah lead a group of second graders in a cheerful rendition of this old man. She had traded designer coats for cozy sweaters and sturdy shoes, and Harold had never seen her look happier. After the show, she found him in the crowd and gave him a hug, the kind he hadn't received since his children were small. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Harold smiled, thinking of Margaret and how proud she would have been of that rainy October evening. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important journeys begin with nothing more than a simple act of kindness, the wisdom to know that everyone, no matter their background, deserves a safe ride home. Outside, the first snow of winter had begun to fall. Harold offered Sarah his arm as they walked to the car. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, they were simply two friends who had found exactly what they needed in each other's company. Because the kindness we offer strangers often returns in the most unexpected ways, not as repayment, but as the quiet reminder that compassion is always the right road to take.